Hello wrestling fans! Welcome to the return of Step Through the Ropes after a lengthy absence. Now, in the year 2000, when Chris Benoit, Dean Malenko, Eddie Guerrero, and Perry Saturn all jumped ship to the World Wrestling Federation, many wrestling fans look back on that as may have been the final nail in WCW's coffin, despite lasting just over another year. Well, let's go back on looking back on that scenario. Now, despite a short stint with WCW in 1993, Benoit returned to WCW in 1995. Around the same time, Malenko and Guerrero were hired. 2 years later, Perry Saturn joined WCW after jumping ship from ECW. Benoit and Malenko were members of the Four Horsemen at different times. Saturn seemingly debuted as a member of Raven's Flock. Eddie, of course, had the LWO for a time. But in 1999, while they were in WCW, Benoit and Malenko were no longer with the Four Horsemen came to an end. Benoit and Malenko were no longer with them. Benoit and Malenko and Saturn aligned themselves with Shane Douglas, forming the Revolution. Eddie was in a car accident at the beginning of 1999 and didn't come back until like that summer, and he aligned himself with Billy Kidman, Rey Mysterio, and I don't know if Juventud Guerrero was a part of it at the time, but I know Eddie, Mysterio, and Kidman were known as the Filthy Animals. Eventually, that group, basically, what happened in early 2000, prior to the WCW sold-out pay-per-view, then head of creative Vince Russo was removed from his position and replaced by Kevin Sullivan, who was known for not pushing new or young talent, which Saturn, Benoit, Malenko, and Guerrero took exception to. Sullivan had booked Benoit to defeat Sid Vicious to win the vacant WCW World Heavyweight Championship as a way to keep Benoit in the company. But then, the very next day, Benoit, Saturn, Guerrero, Malenko all left WCW. As a result, of course, Benoit obviously was stripped of the WCW World title. But on TV, they had Arn Anderson, who refereed the Benoit-Sid match, say that he missed Sid's foot underneath the bottom rope when Sid tapped out to the Crippler Crossface. 2 weeks later, on January 31st, Benoit, Malenko, Saturn, and Guerrero all appear in the front row at Monday Night Raw. And during a match pitting Al Snow and Steve Blackman against the New Age Outlaws, the Radicalz ended up attacking the Outlaws, and they aligned themselves with Mick Foley. The next day, February 1st, SmackDown taping, Foley introduces them to the crowd, but Triple H and Stephanie McMahon, they come out and they basically decide to put them in, let them have a best of 3 matches that night. If they could win 2 out of 3 of those matches, that they would be for storyline purposes, they'd be signed to contracts, even though they were already under contract with WWF at the time. So on those 3 matches, we had X-Pac had first defeated Dean Malenko. The second match, Perry Saturn and Eddie Guerrero teamed up to face the New Age Outlaws. Initially, Saturn and Guerrero were going to win the match. During this match, Guerrero did the frog splash on the top rope, off the top rope, but then Eddie ended up injuring one of his arms, and I guess they called an audible, and Billy Gunn gave Eddie the famous sir and pinned him, and as a result, the McMahon-Helmsley era faction, they had won the series in 2 straight matches. But the third scheduled match between Chris Benoit and Triple H still went on later that night, and Triple H, big surprise, was victorious, although the referee missed Triple H tapping out to Benoit's Crippler Crossface. So that Monday, February 7th by the way, this is the year 2000, this is from the year 2000, folks, in case you haven't kept track or you just weren't watching wrestling at the time. The Radicalz are in the ring with Mick Foley, and they're all saying goodbye, but Triple H comes out and he tells them to show respect to the man who signed their contracts. And it turns out that the Radicalz had Triple H signed them the contracts, but they would have to do his bidding, and as a result they went heel, doing a number on Mick Foley, who was in his dying days of Cactus Jack at the time as a full-time wrestler. And then that night, it was scheduled to be a 5-on-1 handicap match pitting Saturn, Malenko, and Benoit, teaming with X-Pac and Triple H to do battle with a lonesome Cactus Jack. As the night went on, The Rock announced that he would partner up with Cactus Jack to make it a 5-on-2 match. And I don't know if they were ready to, when the match came, it was ready to go 5-on-2, but eventually Rikishi and Too Cool, Scotty 2 Hotty, and the late Brian Christopher, who was Grandmaster Sexay, ended up a 5-on-5 10-man tag team matchup. I don't think there was a winner in this one because it was a pretty chaotic match, and also this marked the return of Kane, who had come back with the late Paul Bearer, because this was Kane's first time on television since like late January, after Tori had left not Tori Wilson, Tori had left Kane for X-Pac after being told about the infamous X-Pac and Tori Christmas story. From there, at No Way Out 2000 on February 27th, Benoit, Malenko, and Saturn lose a 6-man tag team match to Rikishi and Too Cool. At the live Raw on, it was a live Raw anyway, on Monday, March 13th of 2000, at the Continental Airlines Arena, which eventually became the Izon Center, Dean Malenko defeated S.A. Rios to win the Light Heavyweight Championship. And then, April 2nd, WrestleMania 2000. On that very night, the late Eddie Guerrero made his in-ring, well, I don't know if it was his in-ring return or not, but it was himself, Malenko, and Saturn losing to Too Cool and China, who Guerrero had become infatuated with. That very same night, Chris Benoit captured the Intercontinental Champion, defeating Kurt Angle and Chris Jericho in what was the first of 2 matches with those 3 men that night. Jericho ended up defeating, in the second match, the 3 of them had, Jericho defeated Benoit and Angle to become the European champion. The very next night, on April 3rd, Guerrero defeats Jericho for the European Championship and aligns himself with China. And then the whole Latino Heat concept began. Also, it should be noted that month, Perry Saturn had managed to win the Hardcore Championship from the late Crash Holly, only to lose it to Taz, who then lost it to Crash. And also, on the April 17th Monday Night Raw, Scotty 2 Hotty defeated Dean Malenko to win the Light Heavyweight Championship, only for Malenko to win the belt back just over a week later at a SmackDown taping. And Malenko and Scotty actually had a great match at Backlash 2000 to end their little program for the Light Heavyweight Championship with a great ending. But speaking of Backlash 2000, Benoit defeated Jericho to retain the Intercontinental Championship. Guerrero defeated S.A. Rios to retain the European title, while Saturn was unsuccessful at winning the Hardcore Championship in a 6-way match from the late Crash Holly, which involved Hardcore Holly, Taz, and both Hardy Boys. Then, at a SmackDown taping on May 2nd, Jericho defeats Benoit to win the Intercontinental Championship, only to lose it back to Benoit that Monday, May 8th. And then they had a submission match at the Judgment Day pay-per-view where Benoit was victorious. Also at the Judgment Day pay-per-view, Guerrero defeated Malenko and Saturn to retain the European Championship, and pretty much, I think really right after WrestleMania 2000, that was pretty much what seemed to be the end of the Radicalz group. But in continuing with the process, at the King of the Ring pay-per-view, Benoit was disqualified in his match with Rikishi after Taz interfered. Guerrero lost to Val Venus, I think, and that was, another first-round matchup. first round match of that tournament. Saturn and Malenko were not on the show. Then July 23rd at the Fully Loaded pay-per-view, Saturn defeated Guerrero to win the European title. That same night, Benoit challenged The Rock with Benoit with Shane McMahon with him, had challenged The Rock for the world title, and due to the pre-match stipulation where if The Rock was disqualified, he'd lose the championship. But Mick Foley came out and restarted the match because initially it was Shane McMahon who hit the referee with a chair. The referee thought The Rock did it, but it was not him, and that's why Mick Foley came out and robbed Benoit of the moment. Then, let's see. At the SummerSlam 2000 pay-per-view, Guerrero and China defeated Val Venus and Trish Stratus, where the Intercontinental Championship was on the line. Anyone could have won it, I believe, and China was victorious in that one. Benoit defeated Jericho in a best of two out of three falls match. Saturn was in the corner of Terry Runnels, who he was managing at the time, and she lost a stink face match to the Cat, Stacy Carter. She had Al Snow in her corner, and 2 nights, I think it was 2 nights later or a week later, Saturn lost the European title to Al Snow. In September, Eddie had accidentally pinned China to win the Intercontinental Championship in a 3-way match. At the Unforgiven pay-per-view, Benoit had pinned The Undertaker after using the championship belt, but Undertaker had his foot on the ropes, and that was a 4-way match involving The Rock and Kane, and Mick Foley came out and restarted the match again, and The Rock was victorious. Guerrero eventually lost the Intercontinental title to Billy Gunn. The Radicalz actually came back together in November of that year as they were doing Triple H's dirty work again against Stone Cold Steve Austin, who had returned by that point. Let me see. Triple A. I know actually the Radicalz were in a 4-way elimination match as they defeated the Road Dogg, K Quick, who we know is R-Truth, China, and Billy Gunn. Let's see. By the end of 2000, Malenko was kind of turned into a ladies' man character, and he wasn't really seen much on Raw or SmackDown. Benoit defeated Billy Gunn to win the Intercontinental title at the Armageddon pay-per-view, December of 2000. In 2001, Benoit lost the Intercontinental title to Jericho in a ladder match at the Royal Rumble pay-per-view. Saturn was in the Royal Rumble match, only to be eliminated by Kane. Boy. Eventually, I think Benoit broke away from the Radicalz group and started a feud with Kurt Angle. Malenko lost the light heavyweight championship to Crash Holly on I think it was a Sunday Night Heat in March 2001. In March 2001, Eddie won the European title from Test at WrestleMania X7. And I think eventually Eddie had kind of went babyface, aligning himself with the Hardy Boys and Lita. Malenko, I guess around that point, started becoming a producer. It's not okay to say agent anymore in WWE, apparently. Saturn, who was pretty rough on preliminary wrestler Mike Bell, who has since passed away, and I guess as a punishment they gave him the terrible moppy gimmick where they had him carry a mop that had a face painted up a la the soccer or volleyball in the Tom Hanks film Cast Away. And Saturn kept saying silly things on television and kept ending his lines with words saying, "You're welcome." Eventually, I forgot how that all came, how that character came to an end. Guerrero was eventually let go from the WWF after refusing to go to rehab. Benoit had to undergo neck surgery after King of the Ring 2001, where he and Jericho failed to unseat Steve Austin for the world title. Boy. Title. Eventually, I think in 2002, Benoit and Guerrero returned to the WWF. Guerrero had, I don't know, he had underwent rehab. He like sorted his life out. Benoit came back from neck surgery. Saturn, I think, eventually got released in 2002. Of course, we all know, tragically, Eddie Guerrero died in November of 2005 at 38 years old. And the world pretty much knows about Chris Benoit back in 2007, dying at the age of 40. Earlier this year, Malenko had left the WWE to work for All Elite Wrestling, which is run by Cody Rhodes and the Young Bucks. And Perry Saturn, I know, does not wrestle anymore. But, folks, what do you think would have happened? What do you suppose would have happened had those four men not left WCW in the year 2000? What do you think would have happened had Guerrero and Benoit lived past the time they died? Leave your comments and your likes and whatnot on here, and there'll be another edition of Step Through the Ropes again.